Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. And if you are just tuning in with me for the very first time, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm really glad you're here with me today. I am your host, Heather Carey, nutritionist, chef, mom, and a woman who has been around the block with food. I want to open up about real food in relation to health, weight, and our bodies so you can make peace with what you eat. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Real Food Stories podcast. Today, I am with Karen Ciccone, who is a certified Pilates instructor who helps people in pain improve strength, mobility, and well-being in a weight-neutral environment. She's also trained in pain reprocessing therapy through the Pain Psychology Center. Having begun her own journey with chronic back pain as a young teen, DK, as she sometimes likes to be called, has been exploring ways to help herself and others regain joy of movement for decades. After 20 years in the health sector, DK left a corporate career to follow her passion, later launching Movement Remedies, a chronic pain-focused Pilates studio in Boston, Massachusetts. Her first book, You're Meant to Move, A Guide to Conquering Chronic Pain, Increasing Stress Resilience, and Reclaiming an Active Life, was released in December of 2023. So welcome to the show. And I'm so glad that you are here today, because when I heard about what you do, which is help people with chronic pain, and you work also in a weight neutral environment, I was really intrigued because I have my own personal story with chronic pain, and I know very well that fear that you can develop around just simply moving and exercising, because you start to get convinced that you're going to make something worse, or that you just can't move like other people can. Something's really wrong with you. And I know it can create, for me, like a lot of shame, like a just a these like deep-seated shame that I am not like good enough. And that can just create this cycle, and it's hard to get out of the chronic pain cycle. So I wanted to just, why don't we start with you, and I want to hear your story about your childhood experience with pain and how that turned chronic, and then I guess how you overcame it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here and have this conversation. Every time, we can connect with other folks with like-minded views, I just think it's so validating in general, because so many of us are working in these area corners of the world. And it's nice to connect. I've had many chapters in my pain story. As you mentioned, when you read my bio, there's the initial pain story, which is the chronic pain in my back that began when I was an aspiring dancer in my teen years. And that kind of came and went, and it was not something that made any sense to anyone. I still to this day don't really know. It's not like I had an accident or something that would have, made for an acute pain situation. It was really, and to have chronic pain. I mean, now that I know what I know, to have chronic pain recurring at such a young age is unusual. I mean, it certainly happens, but it's not the typical story. Although a lot of the folks I work with have stories like that. And so I do think that there are some patterns, which I'm sure we'll get into in terms of like trauma and experiences that lead to that. So that was sort of the first era. Once I moved on from dance, I realized, my body was just not cut out for it, because it could not, keep up with the demanding schedule and everything. I moved on with my life, went to school and had started a corporate life. And then somewhere in my mid-20s, started having, again, really severe pain, this time going down my leg, kind of classic sciatica symptoms, and was diagnosed with a herniated disc in my lumbar spine, explored a whole range of treatments at that point, from PT to epidural injections to aquatherapy to, you name it. I was really desperate for relief. And towards the end of that experience, several months in, someone said to me, I've heard Pilates is great for backs. And that was really all I heard. That was all I knew. I knew nothing about Pilates, which is funny because nowadays, if you're a dancer, I think you hear about Pilates quite a lot. But at that time, there was no overlap between Pilates and dance when I was a young person. So I went and explored a Pilates class. I found the movements to be very supportive of both my need to feel kind of safe and mobile in my body, but also just being able to strengthen in a way that actually supported my posture and helped my back feel better. Um, and so that was the kind of beginning of my love affair with Pilates as as a partaker in Pilates, and that kind of carried with me as I managed ebbs and flows of my pain from that point on. I mean, you know, herniations heal, but the brain doesn't always understand that like the situation is safe. And I went through, other kinds of things like hip pain and shoulder pain and foot pain. And, pain has kind of migrated with me. It's like this little companion that I've had. It's my longest running friendship. Later on in my career, I, like I said, or like you mentioned, I kind of reached a point in my corporate career where I was really not feeling well in my body or mentally. And so I decided, I want to find something I love that brings me joy and and kind of rewrite my career path based on fulfillment based then instead of just kind of chasing external validation. And, I said, I've always loved Pilates, maybe I would like teaching it. And so that led me down that path. It turned out I really liked it. And from the beginning, for me, because Pilates was always a pain management tool, it was not necessarily like a fitness thing for me. It was always how I manage my pain. I always wanted to work with the clients who had complex issues going on and weren't there for the give me the sculpted abs routine. Like those were not the clients I wanted to work with. So I've always predominantly worked one-on-one, even when I was in a fitness studio. And folks would come in because they hear about it, but it being a beneficial modality for various things. And they would come in with their aches and pains, with joint replacement, rehabilitation, um, folks with MS, there's lots of research about improvements with neurological conditions and balance with Pilates. So those are the folks who would come in seeking care, and they would end up with me because I was the one who was really passionate about that. But what I was kind of seeing in my own life as I was kind of coming to terms with my relationship with disordered eating for so many decades and being inside an exercise space, a fitness aesthetic, like even though there was a lot of good things happening there around supporting people on their pain journey, it was ultimately an aesthetically oriented fitness space. And I felt like I couldn't reconcile in myself my values around all bodies being able to be healthy bodies and all bodies being able to be active and mobile bodies and this kind of pressure to walk in the door looking a certain way. And I couldn't jive that. So I sought to create a space that was, not only geared towards pain as the front of the point of being here, not just like we do exercise, but also we do pain, but kind of like we help pain and the moving your body is how, but also to make it an environment where people understand that they are welcome here and that their body is deserving of movement regardless of the size or shape or abilities and all those things, like getting rid of all of the obstacles we put in front of people who are trying to get active and in other standard spaces. And so that is where the kind of the heart of the Movement Remedies, vision and mission really came together with my own journey and experience. I hope that gave you I know it's a bit longer of an answer, but that's the background.
Yeah, no, that was really great. And I think one thing that just stood out to me too was that Pilates, I think back, maybe years ago, I think when Pilates suddenly became, or you had never really heard of Pilates, and then suddenly it became like more of a thing. But like, I think any of these modalities, yoga, Pilates, like there's like no, I don't know what, like it's
An aesthetic.
an aesthetic. Yes, I know you had said that before, right? An aesthetic that, suddenly you have to be really fit and in shape. And and a certain body size, and it's really intimidating, especially, and I get this, like when you want to go and use it therapeutically for
Mm-hmm.
pain management or to get yourself stronger. And it just, and I definitely remember that too. I mean, it still goes on, like yoga studios, I know around me are like, I would never walk in those doors because you better be like fit and like really like great looking and like you just have to fit like the certain mold. So I love that you are putting the pain management in front of, like, and then you still get fit, but that's
Mm-hmm.
secondary. And of course that would happen if you were, dedicated to Pilates, but it's really about pain management first.
Yeah, and it's so much about the language that we use too, because I think like you even mentioned in the beginning about kind of struggles you've had with certain spaces or this sense that like maybe you're going to show up and you're going to feel like you can't do the class the way that everyone else is doing it, or you're going to be this kind of outlier, or you're going to be given the like remedial version of the fitness class. And that doesn't feel good, especially as we age and we already feel like we're being kind of sidelined by society. That doesn't feel great in the body and in your experience. And so I think walking in knowing that like having different challenges in your body is actually the norm. And frankly, it is the norm. Like people are hurting all over the place. Chronic conditions face like 60% of people will face a chronic condition of some kind, and 20% or more of people have chronic pain, of adults have chronic pain in this country. So it's actually really, really common, but it gets treated in these wellness spaces as the sort of outlier. But here, or really, I would argue in a health and wellness space, we should be kind of making people feel like seeking after relief is the norm. And so it's not that you come in and get the remedial version. It's sort of like, what is the specific thing that your body needs today? It might be different than what someone else's body needs, but we try to, accommodate all those things as part of just a general way of moving, not sort of the exception to the rule.
Yeah, I love that. So I mean, it's not only is it like weight neutral, but just fitness neutral, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you can come in with really any level of fitness because really the first objective is to figure out how to work with your pain.
Well, and it takes so much courage. And I feel like, we just have to congratulate people for even walking in the door. I mean, it's
Hmm.
it's hard. And so feeling comfortable in our bodies is a privilege. I think it's hard for most people. And so like why not try and help people feel comfortable in their bodies first and not make, the changing or the augmentation of the body the first thing. I mean, how many times have we walked into new exercise spaces and it's kind of like, okay, here's the calipers or whatever they're called. Like we're gonna have you hold this thing and we're gonna tell you what your body fat percentage is. It's like you just made 8 assumptions about my goals. like
Right.
nobody said that that was part of the requirements for being active, and it's infuriating.
Yeah, I totally 100% agree with you. And so I think what you're doing is really fantastic and really different, than I mean, I live in Fairfield County, so
Mhm.
there's an aesthetic, thing
Mhm.
happening here
Yeah,
that
yeah.
maybe, in other parts of the country are not, but that's really
And it's also, as we would argue, and I don't know if you want to go down this path, but I mean, it's also an unhealthy aesthetic, like actually. It's actually not
yes.
healthy to force yourself into that. Like we put it on a pedestal as what health looks like, but it's an ideal that doesn't line up with reality. And I want us to be thinking about health and wellness as like feeling good in your body, feeling that you can live the life you want to live as fully as possible, regardless of what pants you're wearing when you do it.
That's fantastic. I hope that, I'm just hoping that becomes like a bigger movement, and just keeps, growing.
Yeah.
I wanted to just go back to your childhood a little bit because what do
Yeah.
you feel like are the traits of chronic pain? How do people, do you feel like people fit into a mold of, who gets into like the chronic pain loop,
Yeah,
that it
I
gets
mean, I
difficult to
can
get out
speak
of?
from my experience and some of what I've researched, but certainly like not a clinician, so quick disclaimer. But I think that there's a couple things. We have to recognize first that pain is a signal from the brain, right? Pain is the brain saying, I'm in danger, or my physical body is in danger. So that may be a real thing, or it may not be a real thing, but that's to the brain, it's real, and so it creates pain. So, there's the saying that fuel or fear is the fuel of pain. So, like, having fear is a big part of that because it creates this sort of code red situation in the body where the nervous system is like particularly sensitized to what's happening around it. Now, you can end up in that state for any number of reasons. I think in my case, I had a lot of anxiety growing up. You may be in an environment you feel unsafe in as a young person or even as an older person. I think that there's also, and there is research around folks just having a different level, a different threshold of sensitivity to sensory processing. So, like, for some people, loud noises are just really intolerable, things like that. And for other people, they're not. And so I think I identify as someone who, I get kind of overloaded in certain situations where there's really high level of sensory stimulation. So like shopping malls used to give me a really big headache. Like I just couldn't deal with like the noise and the music and the people. And like so I think that if your threshold for kind of reaching a state of, danger is a little higher, you're probably going to end up responding with pain. And so you can sort of end up with this like baseline that's a little higher than like, the average bear or the person, next to you. And then if you have, multiple injuries, you are at risk of developing chronic pain, depending on how your body kind of resolves that after the fact. So I think if you like, there's like lots of young people who play sports and, may end up having a bunch of injuries, and then they develop a sensitivity in that area repeatedly. So every time they injure something else, the pain returns in that place because the brain just kind of like makes a connection between, an injury that happened somewhere or maybe a force on the body and then pain elsewhere. But there's also research and Alan Gordon in his book, The Way Out, he's the one who does the pain reprocessing therapy, talks a lot about overachievers and people pleasers and folks who are self-critical. And I think I've definitely seen that in my own life and in my clients. Like, I mean, it's the Venn diagram of people I work with who have chronic pain and who also are like totally convinced that it's their responsibility to like solve everyone else's problems is like pretty much like a bullseye, right? I mean, so many of us, for whatever reason, conditioning or who knows, have come up with this personality type where we're internalizing other people's demands and are extremely critical, maybe perfectionists, and that again can create a sense of, I think, unsafety, lack of safety in the body, an overstimulated nervous system. And, congruent with that, I have a theory from my own work that chronic dieting also is a potential risk factor for chronic pain. And the reason for that is because I believe the people that I work with who have chronic pain, one of the most difficult hurdles we usually have to overcome when it comes to moving is the fact that have a very difficult time actually being in their bodies, being present in their bodies, actually sensing what's happening in their bodies as they're moving. So they're often reliant on a story they've been telling themselves about what they can or can't do. Often a story about, oh, I'm not strong enough for that. My balance is no good. And then I will construct little mini experiments to kind of challenge those hypotheses, and they're very often wrong. Folks are usually much more capable in their bodies than they think they are because of the stories and the narratives they have about their pain being a limiter. And those same people who are unable to actually experience their true physical capabilities are often people who, over many years, learn to ignore hunger cues. Because no one has gone on a restrictive diet without having to like overlook that growl that is like evolutionary biology telling you like eat or you're going to die. And so I think when we like repeatedly ignore and ignore and ignore and teach ourselves to that whatever the body is telling us is happening is not a physical reality. It's kind of it's a mirage. Then we get into our older lives and we have lost our connection to our physical body and we're very detached. So getting folks to reattach is a huge part of healing. And I believe diet culture and the diet that, yo-yo dieting and weight cycling and all the things that many of us experience in an attempt to reach that unhealthy aesthetic, they just contribute to that detachment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think dieting, chronic dieting completely disconnects you from
Mm.
your body, tells you, like you said, your hunger is you're ignoring your hunger signals. You're not eating when you're physically hungry. You're not, and that's just the opposite of self-care and just and it doesn't it just doesn't teach you how to just stay connected
Mm.
to and intuitively eat and so I could see then that relationship to chronic pain. So it sounds like you have a lot of clients who have this association.
Hmm.
That would be
Yeah, I
that would be
do.
really interesting to have more research done on that connection. I would love to see
I
that. But I
know.
mean, it just sounds like from your experience, you have definitely have witnessed that.
Yeah, and it's the language people use. Like even recently someone who has shared with me that they're in eating disorder recovery said, we were doing something um relatively challenging that required body weight support. And I could just sort of tell that they were nervous. And so I said, can you say more about what you're feeling right now? Does this feel scary to you in some way? And the person's response was, I don't trust my body to hold me. I don't trust my body to support me. And again, I think that's like it's a huge kind of, it's sort of a form of body dysmorphia, right? Where you visualize yourself, you see yourself as this weak, unhealthy, like unfit kind of thing. That's not the reality of the physical vessel that you're in, but you've become so, and of course we having gone through this, we understand that you become so attached to the kind of projection of yourself that's in your head that you don't even know the one that you're in. And then I think there's also a lot of kind of self-loathing and resentment that happens in that. And so again, it pushes you towards the projection rather than the reality. And so I think that definitely creates a sense of, and in this particular person's particular case, it was really a sense of I'm not safe. Like I'm going to fall, or I'm not going to be able to hold myself. Like you don't trust your body, or you're angry with your body. And since we talked about fear being the fuel of pain, like surely all those experiences are only going to contribute to a pain experience. And if you are someone who maybe has um, a mild condition that would lead to pain, then it would, of course, exacerbate it, right? It would turn up the volume so much. So sometimes we're dealing with a pain that arises out of something that would be minor in a body where the person felt very safe already, right? So we're kind of setting themselves up for failure with that.
You mentioned very briefly that you experienced an eating disorder a while back. I
Yeah,
mean, do you feel like I mean, is this something you can relate your pain to?
100%. It's really interesting because I mean, and I've never been diagnosed as having an eating disorder, but I went through cycles of restriction, extreme restriction, and then, binging. I think because I never looked small, no one really ever considered it. You know what I mean? And that's also a problem we know exists in the medical system. But what's really interesting is I just reached this point. Maybe it was because I was about to turn 40, I don't know. And I was like surely this is this is not going to continue to be my life. Like spending my Sunday packing foods into tiny little color-coded containers when I could be like reading a book or doing something else, or like not being able to even focus on my tasks at work because all I could think about was the things that I wanted to eat, or the things that I felt guilt about eating, or the things that I like wished I could eat, or someone else was eating and I was like mad that they got to eat it and I couldn't eat it. It was just kind of like always about food. And I was like, this is not a way to live. I can't deal with this anymore. And at the time, I was also in PT, physical therapy for major hip pain, pelvic floor pain. Shortly after, I got plantar fasciitis. I mean, there was just like a whole lot of stuff going on. So I basically started, I don't know, finding all of these influencers who had great books like Christy Harrison, and of course the Tribbley and I always forget the names, but the intuitive eating book.
Hmm.
Um, I just kind of went through book after book after book after book, and every one of them was saying the same thing. And it's always that Minnesota starvation experiment always gets me every time, how they put these men on a 1,600 calorie a day diet, which is like above what I was allowed to eat on my diet at the time. And they were going crazy. They were like turning into super unstable humans. And I said, okay, so this makes sense, right? It just makes sense that this is making me feel crazy. So I started slowly dismantling my dieting norms, my rules, my food rules that I had had that were passed down to me from generations of food rule lovers, over the generations of women in my family. And it was hard. I mean, I still have struggled with that. And this is, 4 years now, because it was really at the end of the quarantine. But what I noticed is that as I started taking this apart, and I did put on a lot of weight, I probably put on 20% of my body weight or something more than that. And that was hard at first to accept because I was certain that that meant I was going to be unhealthy. But since then, I've been able to return to lifting weights at a very heavy level. I've been able to return to jogging. I've been able to go back to doing things in my body that I hadn't done since I was like 20. And it was, slow process, but like it really just kind of reframed for me like, wow, I mean, I had pain and everything going on, but like I also had this like incredible like constrictive way of living that was just limiting my beliefs about myself and also just tying my body up in knots, to be honest with you. And now I'm in my 40s and going through perimenopause, which is another fun topic. But I feel better in my body than I have in a decade at least. So like I mean again this I'm an N of one. So for whatever that's worth, like that has been my experience, that piecing that apart and taking away the stories about my body's failure, to be what I needed, my body's worthlessness because of the way that worth was defined in in the narrow framework I was given. Once I kind of took that apart, it brought a ton of freedom and relief and possibilities for me that I think are very tied to the fact that my pain levels are so low. I mean, like I said, lower they have been in decades.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you let go of just the rigidity, right? And the rules and the probably beating yourself up if you didn't do it perfectly and all of that. And I mean, I can relate to that too. I mean, I grew up with dieters all over the place, in my family, and I was on a diet at my first diet at 11 and just hating my body
Yeah,
for
for
years,
sure.
and yeah, did my chronic pain go hand in hand? I mean, I have to like really like think about that. But I mean, I know I have other instances where like I mean, I remember being in chronic pain in like my teens also, neck
Mm,
pain and stuff, but I also
mhm.
had some other like traumatic experiences that I had gone through. So, but the being on the diets and like restrict, I mean, it is so punishing. And I could definitely see this link between that and and a pain link. I mean, that doesn't mean that everybody
No.
experiences like who has chronic pain experiences issues with their dieting and weight loss and all and eating disorders, but it certainly seems like there that can be part of the connection.
When it wouldn't matter so much if it weren't for the fact that the medical system is continuing to tell people that the answer to chronic pain is weight loss. So, like, not only are we ignoring the fact that we are encouraging people to have a really combative, adversarial relationship with their own physical vessels from a young age, but we're also telling them to exacerbate that as their bodies change. And again, especially being a woman in my 40s, going through lots of changes. I mean, even still, like they're bringing back all the feelings that I had as a younger person because the first thing anybody wants to talk about is my belly fat. It's like, what? Like, this can't be the most important, and it isn't. We know the research already shows that it's not the biggest contributor to my mortality. So, like, why are we talking about that? Why are we diagnosing that? Why, and again, why are fitness spaces and wellness spaces all getting so hung up on, even when I get, Instagram ads about, the menopause journey, like they're always oriented around which supplement is going to suddenly shrink my body. And it's like, I feel like I'm having deja vu. Like, this is not like we're having this conversation again when we shouldn't have been having it in the first place. And now people are in pain and they're focused on the wrong thing. And that's
Well,
why it's like, no, the focus is to move. The focus is to move, to move, to move. Everyone in a body can move, and you don't need to have a certain size. And what I've learned is that my size of my body actually doesn't limit my movement. Like, holy cow, I had no idea.
yeah, I know. Well, good point about the menopause, like ads and everything. I mean, that is out of control. And what an interesting, that's an interesting connection too, because you go through puberty, right? And you're a teenager and like you're starting to feel really maybe awful about your body or like comparing.
Yeah.
And then we go full circle and now we're in our like 40s and 50s and it's like a second puberty, because now we're
Hmm.
losing, but in reverse, though we're losing our
Hmm.
estrogen. And I believe this is where a lot of eating disorders, maybe they've been dormant for a little while,
Yes.
kind of start to come back because the pressure to lose weight, lose the belly fat, the meno belly, and it's confusing. And I think it just stirs up so much
Yes.
emotion. And I think no surprise, this is, I think, a big time for people in chronic pain around this
Yes.
age.
Hmm. 100%.
Is that from your hormones? Is that a connection too? Or is it that we're just having to refocus in on our bodies
Well, Heather,
again?
if they did any medical research on women, we would have more answers about that. But
Exactly. Yeah.
unfortunately, we're dealing with research done by on white male bodies for the past 50 years. But yeah, 100%. I mean, there's definitely a big uptick in pain in this time.
Yeah, I totally I think so. Um, so you mentioned Alan Gordon. He wrote the
Mhm.
book The Way Out. That's one of my all-time favorite books, and I know about the Pain Psychology Center because I've that's sort of how I got into doing a lot of work on for myself in
Mm.
chronic pain. But
Mhm.
you said you have written a book as well.
Yes, I have.
Let's talk about that because
Sure.
it sounds like a great book. And I love the title You're Meant to Move because I really do believe that too.
Mhm.
I think that people think I'm in pain and I can't move like others. But I think our bodies are meant to move, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we're wired for that. So tell me a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so I wrote the book for a couple of reasons. First of all, I mean, I do love to write, but first of all, I wanted to kind of process 3 decades worth of dealing with chronic pain and kind of help people who were in the position I was in a while ago, maybe get to where I got a little faster. If I could share my story and then also what I've observed with my clients, there's a lot of anecdotes in it of client stories and experiences in their own words sometimes about this kind of trying to rewrite the narrative that we have about our ability to move and what how pain factors in there. And one of the major hurdles for me, and especially after the disc herniation, it was a list of don'ts. Don't bend at the waist, don't sit for too long, don't twist your body, don't and I in hindsight, I think a lot of times what happens is they give you guidance in the acute phase and it sticks with us. And so sometimes we keep doing the acute phase long after it's healed. But the reality is the research is very, very clear now that for the most part, you want to move your joints like immediately. I mean, think about hip replacement folks who they like have climb a stairs in like 24 hours. I mean, healing is really tied to moving. And so that was advice, clinical advice I was given repeatedly that set me back years because of the fear that it generated and in kind of, and again, just like with the pain processing, stuff too. It's like your brain like links a connection between bending over is how I hurt myself, therefore I should never bend over. And now you've eliminated a really important movement from your vocabulary. So I wanted to take all of the bad information I received and what I've learned since then and package it up for folks who could then take it and really have like a step-by-step guide. Because the second reason I wrote it is that I am a single person in a brick and mortar studio in Boston, and I can only see so many people. But I feel like there's a lot of work that people can do on their own. I mean, as magnificent as Pilates and the equipment are, there is a lot you can do just working by yourself. And so it's written in such a way that it would be a 12 to 14 week process where you can go through all the different stages with a lesson and activities for each week. And it comes with a journal that comes with it and some, recommended movement exercise videos. And then by the end, you should be able to design a movement program for yourself, the one that's catered to not just what your body feels up for in this season, but also like what your goal is. And I don't mean your goal like I need to do 10 push-ups, but like I want to be able to climb the steps of the Cinque Terre trails or whatever. I want to be able to carry my groceries across a parking lot, like really realistic goals that have to do with how we live. And that's how I think our movement programs should be designed. They should be designed around keeping us functional into our older age. Like that's the point. So that's the way You're Meant to Move is structured. It tackles all the factors around why pain persists in our bodies. Really, we're trying to remove that self-blame and the shame that comes with the message of, chronic pain is therefore somehow your problem or your fault because of, maybe choices, which I think, again, the weight loss rhetoric really does in the medical system. So yeah, I'm really excited about it being out in the world and hope that people are able to find that they can chart a new path toward an active life because, not only is regular movement, I believe, the most important health promoting behavior that we can commit ourselves to. But it also, is really good for us even when we're hurting because of the chemical benefits, inflammation benefits, cardiovascular disease prevention, I mean, autoimmune disease support, like every single system in our body reacts really well to movement. So it's not just you're meant to move like get off the couch because that is kind of part of it. Like we've built a modern sedentary society and we need to rewrite the rules. But it's also you're meant to move in the sense that finding any form of movement will reap rewards for all of your physical systems, even if the movement is not, what we would define classically as exercise.
Yeah, well, that's great because I was going to say, I know you're in a brick and mortar business in Boston, and I wish that you lived closer to me. I mean, not that far away, but I would love to have you here with me because I would be signing up in a second. But so that's so great that you have a book with a program in it
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
people can go and do that on their own. I also know about like that feeling, this side note I just heard you say, that to to get out of the feeling like it's my fault, like the pain's my fault, because I lived with that for years, that
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's real.
it's the perfectionist people,
Yes.
like, I mean, all of that just felt like I definitely did something wrong, and so therefore it's not my fault. And how am I supposed to fix this? And I mean, it just, and that's a whole fear spiral too. So so your book sounds really actionable and gives people the steps to.
Yeah, and I think it's a start of a journey. Like I think you can get through it relatively quickly if you were to sit and read it cover to cover, but it really shares the research behind a lot of what I do, and I get in the stories behind what I do. And if folks are curious, even for yourself, and want to email me, dk@movementremedies.org, I'm happy to share a pass for my restorative Pilates mat class, which is available virtually 3 times a week. So I just think it's important that people find what speaks to them in terms of being active and not let the fear, a lot of fear, the fear, the guilt, it not being enough. Don't let all those obstacles that we build up in our minds get in the way of what is going to really benefit you in the long run. And I know it's a fight. I mean, it's a fight for me. I have a room full of equipment and it's a fight for me to get moving sometimes, but I'm always glad when I do.
Yeah, that's great. So people can connect with you online and take a
Yeah,
class with you, a mat class. Okay,
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
great. Good. Well, DK, it was so nice talking with you,
Same.
and really, I mean, I want to keep this conversation going about the connection between dieting and body image and disordered eating and chronic pain, because I think it's really important. And you're doing great work. I think it's just, fantastic. I will put all the links for you in the show notes so people can get in touch with you.
Great.
And thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And as always, if you loved this podcast, please consider gifting me with a 5-star review. It is so helpful for me to get the word out on real eating, our real bodies, and real food stories. Thank you so much and have a great week. Bye for now.